Welcome to another episode of For the Record, Conversations with Ukrainian Writers. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Ukrainian poets Lyudmila and Boris Khersonsky, who will be in conversation with American poet Marie Howe. Widely regarded as one of Ukraine's most prominent Russian-language poets, Boris Khersonsky was born in 1950 in Chernivtsi, my father's hometown, incidentally, and spent most of his life in Odessa, where he practiced medicine at the psychiatric hospital and taught psychology at the Kyiv Institute of Contemporary Psychology and Psychotherapy. In Soviet times, Khersonsky was part of the Samizdat movement, which disseminated alternative nonconformist literature. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Khersonsky came out with 17 collections of poetry and essays in Russian. After Maidan, he began writing in Ukrainian. Khersonsky was the poet laureate of the Kyiv Laurels Poetry Festival, the recipient of the Brodsky Stipend, the Jury Special Prize in the Literaris Festival for East European Literature, and the Russian Prize. Amelia Glazer, writing in LitHub, notes, he's written about the shtetls of his Jewish ancestors, his estrangement from his heritage, the stagnant presence of Soviet memorials in Ukraine, and Orthodox Christianity, to which he converted. She quotes a poem by Taras Shevchenko, and she says if Shevchenko's poem is about spiritual rootedness, Khersonsky's is about rootlessness. Quote, "It's my destiny to fly overhead," he writes further, "with the Jewish ashes from the Holocaust." Lyudmila Khersonsky was born in Tiraspol, Moldova in 1964. She's an award-winning poet and author of 3 collections of poetry, with a 4th one coming out from Arrowsmith Press this spring. Her work has been honored with the Voloshin Prize and translated into numerous languages, including German, Lithuanian, English, and others. A professional translator, she has translated into Russian poetry the poetry of many authors, including our old friend Seamus Heaney. In the US, her poems have appeared in Poetry International, Plume, and other journals. She lives in Odessa, Ukraine. Both Lyudmila and Boris's work are now available in one volume, The Country Where Everyone's Name is Fear, from Lost Horse Press, edited by Ilya Kaminsky and Katie Farris. In the introduction to the book, there's a wonderful exchange between the writers and editors. The editor, Ilya, asks, in Lyudmila's poem, one hears the voices of poetry of people suffering as they experience war. In Boris's poem, one hears the recollection of war. There's a kind of music of crisis in your work. Boris answers, I will put it more crudely, not just the music of crisis, the muse of crisis, and even perhaps the muse of war. During the war, the texture of poetry separates into at least 2 paths. One is aphoristic, approaching things at a distance. Lyudmila adds, and I would say that in a time of crisis, I want my poetry to amplify the voices of specific people, often those I've met. The philosophical perspective, the historical one, I leave that to Boris. In my work, I want real people. They will be speaking with Marie Howe, one of America's best-loved poets. Marie was born in 1950 in Rochester, New York. Her first collection, The Good Thief, was chosen for the National Poetry Series by Margaret Atwood, who praised Howe's poems of obsession that transcend their own dark roots. Her most recent book, Magdalene, was longlisted for the National Book Award. The Kingdom of Ordinary Time was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book of the Year. Her groundbreaking book, What the Living Do, was in many ways an elegy for Howe's brother John, who died of AIDS in 1989. In 1995, Marie co-edited the anthology In the Company of My Solitude, American Writing from the AIDS Pandemic. About poetry and everyday life, Marie notes, quote, this might be the most difficult task for us in postmodern life, not to look away from what is actually happening, to put down the iPod and the email and the phone, to look long enough so that we can look through it like a window. And that's precisely what Marie will be doing today, is looking at what is happening. She has taught at Sarah Lawrence, Columbia, and NYU. She's received fellowships from the Bunting Institute at Radcliffe, the NEA, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Academy of American Poets, and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. She was also Poet Laureate of New York State from 2012 to 2014. She lives in New York. It's our great good fortune that the 3 poets have found themselves together in Italy at a writer's retreat. I'll now turn it over to Marie.
Thank you, Askell. And wonderful to see you both, Lyudmila and Boris. Even though we are a 5-minute walk away from each other, we meet on the screen. Well, how do I say, it's a miracle that we've all come together here at the same time. I first learned about Ukraine from Osgold many, many years ago. And I am still, like so many Americans, ignorant about much of its history and much of its culture. So I want to ask you just a question to begin with, which is something Osgold and I were speaking about a little while ago. That I don't think us Americans, many of us, especially those of us who have grown up far from the land our people left, have no idea that people in Ukraine and indeed throughout Europe can speak in many different languages. And language seems to be one of the central beating hearts of both of your bodies of work, so to speak. Can you help Americans understand why one can speak Ukrainian and Russian and other languages as well, and how choosing to speak in each language can be a political act? I, for example, didn't know until recently, till Osgold told me that Ukrainian has been prohibited during periods of time. Can you, Boris, you speak directly to this in a letter you wrote that's in the introduction to the book that Osgold mentioned. You're born in Russia, you speak Russian and you speak Ukrainian, and you have decided to teach or speak in Ukrainian right now. Is this still true?
First of all, Russian and Ukrainian are from one family of languages, Slavonic languages, and they started to differentiate many, many years ago, at least 5 centuries ago. Now they are similar, but they are different. For the last 300 years, Ukraine was under umbrella, I would say not umbrella, something much heavier, of Russian Empire. Russification was a part of policy of Russian Empire, so Ukrainian language was oppressed for a long time. Several times, government of Russian Empire even had an order to forbid teach Ukrainian, write Ukrainian, and teach Ukrainian. And the ideology of Russia was that Ukrainian is like dialect of Russian or corrupted Russian language. And I believe Soviet Union inherited this approach toward Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian language, which is totally not true, because actually Kyiv is much older than Moscow is for several hundred years. Many things which Russia believes are Russian, they are Ukrainians, because most of the writers who write in 17th and 18th centuries in Russia, even in Moscow, were from Ukraine, from Ukrainian origins. Many examples, some of them are from Belarus, because we were like bridges between Europe and Russia.
Yeah.
Russia not always welcome people from Ukraine, but there was time when all the bishops in all the Russia were Ukrainian, and Elizabeth II even must make an order to permit ethnically Russian to be bishops, because before of it, only Ukrainians were in charge of religion in Moscow. And many things like that. All Ukrainian people now are practically bilingual.
Yeah.
My generation is totally bilingual because we rise in Russian-speaking families, but we learn Ukrainian. We don't have much practice, but during the years of independence, we try to master language, and we now I believe I am totally bilingual. I can write Russian, can write Ukrainian. Probably my Russian poetry is maybe higher quality, maybe not. I don't know, I couldn't estimate. That's what I can see.
You know, thank you, Boris. Osgold mentioned Seamus Heaney, and I think about the Irish and how they weren't allowed to speak, you know, Gaelic for so long. And when I was in Ireland way back in 1970, there was the beginning of this learning Gaelic again. And now so many people speak Gaelic in Ireland, and the language has come back. And of course, that language could hold things that English cannot hold. And I think of Seamus too, and I think of your poem, which I wanted to ask you to read, In the Country Where Everyone's Name is Fear, Ludmila, when he, you know, the common phrase during the so-called troubles in Ireland was, you know, whatever you say nothing. So that when speech itself is, the war is declared on speech, or speech responds to war in such a way that it changes. So I'm wondering if you would read that for us.
В стране, где все боятся, ничего, что ты ничего не видишь, ничего не слышишь, никому не скажешь, за пазуху не положишь, в кармане не держишь, в оба уха, в два глаза, в слепые ноги, куда глаза не глядят, уходишь, идешь, не оглядываешься, смелый, ничего не слышишь, никому не скажешь. А куда придешь в новое место, то и там ничего от тебя не узнают.
In English then, translated by Grace Mahoney, in a country where everyone's name is fear. In a country where everyone's name is fear, it's good that you don't see a thing and don't hear a thing. Say to anyone, not a thing. Slip nothing in your bra. Keep nothing in your pocket. In both ears, nothing. In two eyes, nothing. Blind feet, no looking back, no looking back. If you look back, my brave, if my brave, you look back, my brave, you say nothing when you arrive to a new destination. They will learn nothing from you. They will learn what nothing is. Nothing, nothing,
Thank
nothing,
you.
nothing.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much.
So beautiful. I mean, the nothing, nothing, nothing becomes so physical, so something, but we don't know what the something is. We just know nothing, 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 nothing.
That's like kind of a sad warning to humankind. It is the easiest way in this time just to pretend that you do not look back, you do not think, you do not notice. You just close your eyes or wear glasses or look into happy direction, which very often you sometimes create regardless of what's going on around you. And this is just some sad description of what's going on when people pretend there is nothing going on, nothing happens, everything is okay.
And everything is happening. You know, you and I spoke on a walk we took about, well, at least for Americans, you know, we only invade other countries. Other countries have not invaded us. So we don't know anything about what it is to be in a city that's being bombed. You know, we make much, and it's important to make much of what happened to the World Trade Center, but it's nothing like the bombardment of the whole country. And so we watch from afar. And you said to me the other day, it's like reality TV, you know, but there's a kind of addictive quality to watching other people suffering from afar. And how so many of us Americans do that because we're isolated geographically and we don't feel threatened in the same way, at least not yet. And so this notion, you have so many poems where people literally are in bed, covering their heads, turning away against a wall or their back against a wall. And in many ways, of course, we are doing the same thing by looking at these horrific images, but without being responsible for them or to them in some way. One of the fellows I asked, this is for both of you, really, I asked the fellows here, Kemi and Kate, Tempest and Stacy and some people, what would you want to ask Boris and Ludmila? And one of them said, what's the poem for? So I guess I'm asking both of you, what's the poem for? And who is your audience? Do you write for an audience? Do you write for yourself? These days, has that changed? So that's sort of a cluster of questions within that question. What's a poem for? It's the least, it's an art form that is maybe the most personal and private of art forms. We come to a poem, usually we read it to ourselves, it's intimate. What's the poem for you, Ludmila?
Talking about my war poems, I would say it is for drawing some attention to the corners where something alive hides. We are used to think that the war is in the battlefield, where there are those huge weapons, where there are soldiers firing, shooting at each other, explosions. That's one part of the war. It has kind of become an entertainment for very many viewers all over the world. And as I told you yesterday, they can choose when they just switch it off and go to have their dinner or whatever and talk about other things. But my war, the war I'm writing about, is the war in every corner, in every little corner of the room where a frightened animal hides, where there can be a child covering his head with a blanket. The corners which are usually unnoticeable on a large scale when we talk about casualties, just enlisting them, but each casualty is the whole world of suffering instead of happiness in normal life. And so perhaps for me, the audience is, I would just say, everybody who has this compassion, everybody who does not regard war as entertainment and is ready to listen to those tiny, very thin voices from the corners of the devastated buildings, from every corner of the war.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
It's so beautifully said. And I think of your poems at eye level, eye level. Well, Boris has a longer view, but such eye level poems. And you also include the other animals, the other animals that are hurt, killed, maimed, and suffering in this very clumsy, messy, bombing you where you live, in your fields, in your homes kind of war. But what you avoid is some kind of sensationalist image, so that when an image does come, it holds so much. Like I'm thinking about Buried in the human neck, a bullet. Could you read that poem for us? That's such an extraordinary poem. And the questions you ask.
Пуля в человеческой шее выглядит как вшитый глаз, как будто человек смотрит глазом из затылка своей судьбы. Кто стрелял в спину, кто отдавал приказ, кто будет хоронить и почем гробы. Все человеческое начинается и заканчивается войной. Кто бы ни наступал, не поворачиваясь спиной. Говорит Господь, это от того, что народ мой глуп, не знает меня. Неразумные они дети, и нет смысла у них. А дети думают, что они крепки, как броня, что их массово шьют, и на всех хватит портних. Эти латают дыры, сшивают шейные позвонки, пришивают оторванные пуговицы от руки. А Господь говорит, они умны на зло, но, говорит Господь, не умеют делать добра, а неразумные дети, если выживут, думают, повезло, а если умрут, думают, это было вчера, а сегодня уже другой день, и портнихи стоят с покрывалом и говорят на день. Долго ли видеть знамя, слушать звуки трубы? Что за зверь пробудился? С кем воюет спецназ? Кто стрелял в спину? Кто отдавал приказ? Кто будет хоронить? И почем гробы?
This first image I will never forget. Buried in a human neck, a bullet. Buried in a human neck. A bullet looks like an eye. Sewn in. An eye looking back at one's fate. Who shot him there? Who gave the order? Which man? Who will bury him? And what's the rate? When it comes to humanity, war is the beginning and end. Whoever attacks you, don't turn your back, says the Lord. For my people are foolish. They have not known me. They are silly children and they have no understanding. But the children feel as strong as their machinery, mass produced with plenty of seamstresses for repairing. Some ladies patch holes, others fix neck bones. Still more sew on buttons that were torn away from hands. And the Lord says, they are wise in doing evil, but, says the Lord, they do not know how to do good. But the children, if they survive, say it was luck. And if they die, they think that was yesterday. Today's another day. And the seamstresses stand with a shroud telling them, put this on. How long must we put up with the flags? The trumpets calling us into the fray. What beast has awakened? Where did our special forces land? Who shot that man in the back? Who gave the command? Who will bury him? And what's the rate? Extraordinary poem. I mean, the Lord in there, the Lord says, and then these questions, that man, him, you know, and there's a specificity again, and the way that it just strikes me as a woman's voice. How long these flags? How long this, you know, must it go on? I don't mean to exclude men. It's just my feeling. It just feels like kind of questions women ask. And I love that about your work.
Thank you.
Strong.
Thank you.
Strong woman. Boris, your work is so dialectical. You don't let us off the hook. Everything the poem says also applies to the reader, but we're comfortable for a while, and then we're implicated over and over again in your poems, and I find them so wonderfully balanced that way. I'm shaken and I'm changed when I come out of one of your poems. So I'm thinking that of well, so many of them, but perhaps it's better to begin with. They printed it in the medical history of that poem. Would you be ready to read that?
Вони написали в історії хвороби. Ніякого голодування не було. Була стійка маячня Ганни Михайленко, вчительки української літератури. 7 років вона була у спеціальній психіатричній лікарні. То була гібридна лікарня, суміш дурдома і в'язниці. Тоді гібридна лікарня, зараз гібридна війна. 7 років біблійний термін. 7 років служив Яків Лавану за Рахіль, бо він любив її. 7 років плач Рахіль за дітьми своїми і не може утішити, бо їх немає.
They printed in the medical history, there was no holodomor. It was the stable delusion of Anna Mikhailenko, a teacher of Ukrainian literature. For 7 years, she was in a special psychiatric hospital. It was a hybrid hospital, a madhouse, and a prison. It was a time of hybrid hospitals. Now is a time of a hybrid war. 7 years is a biblical phrase, and Jacob served Laban 7 years for Rachel because he loved her. 7 years. Rachel calls for her children. She can't calm herself because they don't exist. So you use the word in this poem. Help me, Oscar, how to say it. Holodomor. How do you say it?
Oh, you said it beautifully. Holodomor.
Holodomor. So Boris, can you tell us what that word means? The Holodomor.
In English vocabulary, yeah, as a pogrom, some Russian and Ukrainian words unfortunately become international. Actually, Holodomor was in winter of 1932, when after collectivization, so-called collectivization, Russian troops, they confiscated nearly all the food from Ukrainian villages. They just left people to starve. It was artificial famine,
Yeah.
because it was a good harvest. And this harvest could be enough for feeding not only Ukrainian people, because Ukraine was always breadbasket for all the Europe. And actually, significant part of this harvest was sold to Germany. Yeah. And so people began to starve, and they left of starvation. And it was really torture. We have some memories about that. People who by miracle survived. Actually, Robert Conquest, he is American Canadian writer and scientist. He made a book, Harvest of Sorrow.
Yes.
And it was the first book about Holodomor, which I read. You know, it was brought to Odessa illegally. It was translated not officially. Officially, it was translated even later. Something were translated not correct, as I understand now.
Yeah.
Now we have many researches about that. And I really would like to people everywhere remember that Holodomor was like reflection of Holocaust. So 6 million from this side, 6 million from this side. And it means that Nazis and communists were very, very close. And what Nazis had red flags, you know, and communist red flags. They say we are working party, and communists say we are working party. And okay, because of that, all the information about Holodomor was forbidden. There were no Holodomor, says officials. Kana Mikhailenko is well known for me, teacher of Ukrainian language, Ukrainian national activist. During the Brezhnev period, she was arrested and she was diagnosed as schizophrenic. And I myself, after her liberation, had the possibility to look through her history. And they say that information about Holodomor was just delusion of Mikhailenko. You know? And this short Verliber is about this story. I knew her for many years before she was arrested and after she was liberated. I can maybe talk about that a long time.
I'm sure you can. I wish that, you know, I studied with Joseph Brodsky when I was at Columbia, and he, one day he chastised us. He leaned back in his chair, or he leaned forward, actually, I just saw him lean forward. And he said, "You Americans, you're so naive. You think evil is going to come into your homes wearing big black boots. Don't look, it begins in the language. Look to the language, guard the language. And notice what words you can't say, what words are questioned, what truths are erased, you know." And of course, in our country right now, the language is so deranged, so corrupted by politicians and by popular culture that that we hardly have, well, it can hardly speak. But this poem brings back that day at Columbia when Joseph was saying this to us. I've never forgotten it. So it really matters what words we don't remember, what words we don't say. This kind of backwardness, this turning things upside down, is also in your poem, The Tail That Wags the Dog. Ludmila, would you read that for us? That's a kind of hilarious poem and also frightening, because it's comical almost, but subjectivity, agency is questioned utterly in that poem.
Хвост, который виляет собакой, язык, разговаривающий человеком, лопата, закапывающая гробокопателя, кисть, рисующая художника, бедро, беляющее танцовщицей, весло, гребущее теми, кто в лодке, голова, думающая человеком. Да мало ли.
See the tail that wags the dog. This was translated by Katie Ferris and Ilya Kaminsky. See the tail that wags the dog. Language is speaking the man. Look, the shovel is making a hole in the grave digger. Brushes paint artists into the walls. The hip is wagging the dancer, see? That oar is rowing every person in the boat. Don't you see it? Here is a head that thinks a man into a man. Just
Thank you.
crazy, crazy good. And so funny, comical, almost a surrealist cartoon. And yet, yeah, language is speaking me. Who's speaking what? Who's zooming who, as Aretha Franklin was so beautifully saying. Who's zooming who? Who's speaking what? Who's doing what to what? And the poem questions all that. And funny, wry, darkly, seriously funny. Boris, well, a couple more questions. I keep forgetting my questions. Oh, did you answer what is poetry for, you guys? I don't think you did. What is poetry for, Boris? Why don't you go first? What is poetry for?
I started to write poetry in young age under the time of Soviet Union. It was impossible to publish them, and sometimes dangerous even publicly recite them. So I accustomed to write as it is in Russian stole, in the table, you know. So it was almost secret thing. Later, my poetry became a part of Sam Izdat movement. It means self-published. So when it was, I had an audience, I know that intelligent people, engineers, doctors around me will read it, will duplicate it and give to friends. And KGB was a part of audience, very, very good, probably, but very, very attentive. So now I just write poems and just like a child throw a stone into water. You know, I don't know who will read it, who will understand it. I actually believe that only people of my generation could understand my poems. But I was mistaken, because when I have a reading in Odessa and in Moscow in the time before aggression and hybrid war, and in Kiev and in Crimea before it was annexed. So my audience were young people.
Yeah.
And they asked me questions, what it's about. They were interested in the historical context of my work. Now internet is my audience, and who knows?
Yeah, beautifully said. I mean, the young are hungry for elders to tell them what they were not taught, you know.
Yeah.
In our country too, they're really hungry for that. How about you, Ludmila? What is poetry for you?
Very, very often it is for the author, just to help the author go through some things, good emotions, sad emotions. Very often it's like kind of a little container or a little basket you might just put somewhere on the shelf. So full of emotion it is, and it is there. Sometimes you come back to it. It helps you to save things. It helps you to get rid of some pain or shame or fear. It helps you in so very many strange ways, and particularly when it is also helpful to other things. You feel other people, you feel really very, very happy. It's like as if you are some kind of old-time doctor who is just doing some kind of funny medication, putting all crazy stuff in there, and then somebody may drink this mixture and become healthy, and you never know what is it there in this mixture that just made a person to get healed so miraculously. That's perhaps what poetry is.
It's beautifully said. Beautifully said. I like that, the elixir. And then people can come to it and find this cup and drink it and feel less alone, more connected, and they feel recognized themselves. And yet both of you are poets of witness. I mean, you, in your different ways, witness what is happening in the corners, as you say, what's happening right in front of us, what's happening internally. I wonder, Boris, if you would read Against the Backdrop of the silent muses, which I have as on page like around 49 or 50, because that's a poem that I feel implicates us in a surprising way. And the muse of war, you know, and one of the places you read, I think it might have been in Ilya's introduction. You said in times of war, the muses scream. For some people, for others, they're silenced. They can't. We have a saying these days, especially after, we don't even want to say his name, but after the person named Trump was elected president of this country, people just sputtered. There was no language for what was happening. It seemed so many of us just said, there are no words to describe this. How could this happen? And we also, and yet there's a way that some people have found language to pierce that, through that incredulity, that denial, that naivete, even in the face of real evil. So, would you read this poem for us?
На фоне молчания муз слышнее гром канонады. На фоне рыдания вдов слышнее смех клоунады. Кто богат, тот и рад, а мы бедны и не рады. На фоне синего неба страшней облаков громады. Что в реке не потонет, то зарастет травою. На фоне блеяния стад просторнее волчьему вою. Где базар, там и вор, там и блатной разговор, а там и перо под ребро или выстрел в упор. На фоне добра есть где разгуляться злу. В огне всегда найдется, чему превратиться в золу. Нож в кармане чужом, и сам ты ходишь с ножом. На фоне лжи незаметно, что сами мы тоже лжем.
Your lineation, Boris, is so interesting because it's like a song that doesn't stop for breath, you know, very different from Lyudmila's. So I'm going to try and read it the way you would have us read it, I think. Against the backdrop of silent muses, against the backdrop of silent muses, heavy gunfire thunders louder. Against the background of grieving windows, the clowns laugh louder. The rich are happy, but we're poor and unhappy. Against the blue sky background, the crowds of clouds are terrifying. What won't drown in a river will overgrow with grass. Against the backdrop of bleating flocks, there's more room for the howling wolves. Where there's a market, there's a thief and conniving, and then there's a shank in your rib cage or gunshots at point blank. Against the backdrop of the good, there's room for evil. In the fire, there's always something that could turn to ash. A knife in someone's pocket and a knife in your pocket. Against the background of lies, it's not apparent that we are also liars.
Thank you.
Extraordinary. You got me. I mean, I'm caught in your understanding of who I am, just who we all are, that it's not possible to live without living in a dialectical between these good, evil, these polarizations don't serve us. I don't mean to reduce your poem to something I can say. I can't say it, but I'm so moved by the tensions it holds.
Thank you. Again, you know, when in the days of trouble, in the days of war, when you are almost conquered by a lie of others, you think, okay, they do it, why I don't do it? They break all rules, why I don't follow rules? I make myself weak, and so I am infected by evil from my enemy. And it disturbs me really disturbs me when I see that sometimes our journalists, they use the same words which uses Russian propagandist.
Right.
It makes me suffer. But I understand that we have no choice. And this is the most evil thing in the war, that there way you can be or victim, or you can be killer, or you can be witness, silent witness, you could be a liar. We have no choice. We couldn't detach from this situation. And I believe this short poem is about that.
We're getting close to an hour, and I wanted to just ask a couple of more things. It's been such a pleasure, such an honor, really, to be with you both during this time, and to be with Askold, and to be with all of you who are going to be with us. People want to know, you've been away, you left Odessa after the bombing began. You've been away. Do you plan to return? Can you return? What is your relationship to that place now and to your lives as you see them in the future? And I know it may change every day, but.
Okay, yes, we want to return. And we plan to return in the beginning of December. After our program, we'll finish the last, which I know it is a festival in Paris of Ukrainian literature devoted to Odessa.
Oh.
Odessa is our beloved city. Live in Odessa is not easy. It is complicated because of the tradition of this city, but we adjust to it. So our attention to our city not changed, but we realize we will return to another Odessa, because with almost maybe 10 months of war, it changed the population. Many people left. Many people come to Odessa from a different region, because Odessa is a relatively safe place comparing with Kharkiv, for example, Donetsk, Mariupol especially. So population will be different. We won't find our relatives. We won't return. I personally, I won't find many of my friends. They won't return, or they are killed on the field of a battle. But we will return. We will see what is around, and we'll work for our city. But we won't return to occupied by Russian Odessa. I am almost sure it won't happen. But it is one only case for us not to return.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lyudmila, do you want to add what you feel about it?
Like Boris said, yes, we do plan to come back, and I'm missing my home very much. And the only situation when we will not come back is if Odessa is seized by the Russians. I hope it won't happen. I very much trust our Ukrainian army and very many patriots who do not want this regime in Ukraine, regardless the fact that somebody may speak Russian language. It does not mean that a person, a citizen of Ukraine, belongs to the Russian culture. It is a shame to belong to the culture Russia has demonstrated to the entire world now. This is not the culture, and it will take time before this madness is cured. But for us, it is important to live in Ukraine. I mean, wounded Ukraine with very many ruined things, with seriously ruined infrastructure, with just all those injuries that had no justification, no explanation, no reason, nothing whatsoever. So yes, we do want to return.
Last question. What would you have, let's say, an American audience, many of whom knew so little about Ukraine until Putin brought our attention to it, and now think about Ukraine much, much more than they ever did, and yet are so ignorant still about what it is to be invaded on our own land. What would you have us know, or what would you have us remember or know, or what would you want to tell us, Boris?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank the American people and the American government for the support they give to Ukraine in this tragic moment. We're really very grateful for it. We're grateful to have the nation that still has this sense of normality and feeling of what's fair, what's not. And I just want to also say to American audience, don't be deceived by smiling Russian governors or by the false Russian propaganda. It's very skillful. Russian media are very skillful. Billions of dollars have been invested into this plague, and the plague started in people's brains, and it is contagious, and it is much more dangerous than all COVIDs our humankind faces now. I just want to say, be on the alert with this country, and this is the most important thing. And you can trust Ukraine. Ukraine is the country of freedom, and we will win, because the justice and the good always wins the evil.
Boris, do you want to add anything?
Join Ludmila. She really said what I think too. I just want to add that, okay, first of all, we should tell people that Ukraine exists not like a victim of aggression, but as a big democratic country without some fault, but okay, where is no country white and fuzzy, as we say. Okay, but it is democratic country which can change government. We can criticize government. We can speak Russian if we want to. We can speak English if we can to. So we have a very good system of education, relatively, especially if we look to Russia. We have a lot of culture, traditions, which is longer, twice longer than Russian culture. And we want people to know that this country is struggling for freedom, not only for themselves, but maybe now we struggle against most powerful and most evil country. Even Reagan told that it is empire of evil. It was USSR, but Russia say we inherit all the USSR property, and we inherit this role of empire of evil. So we thank you for help us, but you should remember, you help not only us, you help for yourself. And our victory experience would be victory of democracy against totalitarianism. Thank you. It was a pleasure and privilege to talk to you today.
The pleasure and the privilege is ours.
Yeah.
Thank you, both of you, for being here, for sharing your work. Oskol, thank you for making this happen.
Thank you so much. As you might say, I'm verklempt. This is a deeply moving, profound conversation. I really am endlessly grateful to all of three of you for taking time during your residencies away from your own work to share these important words and these powerful poems and this kind of depth of thought that you brought to this. And we look forward to meeting you. I look forward to meeting you in person, either here or there. I've been to your beautiful city, to Odessa. I've walked down the Potemkin stairs. I've been to the Opera House. I've seen where Babel lived. My favorite story of all time is Guy de Maupassant. And at some point, I'd love to talk about translation and the many approaches to it. In any case, thank you so much, Marie, for making this possible for us all. And one day in New York, if not Paris. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Goodbye, everyone. Wonderful to be with you all.